cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. By the way, this episode is also available as a video on our YouTube channel. Just search Energipreneurs. Thank you for joining. Good morning, Danny.
Good morning.
I'm in Manila. Oh, you're not in Sydney, right?
I am in Sydney, yes.
Lovely. Okay, tell me about yourself. I read a few bits and I especially liked about the terms, the bold ideas in energy, right? Bold ideas is what needed right now. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. So I'm a long-time energy entrepreneur, so I'm very drawn to your program and started a number of companies, mostly in the sort of residential solar space, providing financing and software solutions to contractors and other things in the US and elsewhere around the world. In more recent years, I've diversified into more of a sort of board director and mentor and chairperson and investor in companies in the space. And I also ran the California Clean Energy Fund for a decade and a group called New Energy Nexus, which supports startups with training programs. Now I moonlight between those things and some philanthropy, trying to drive the energy transition. My personal mission is to help the world have fun, I call it, solar for universal need. I think this is the energy supply and system that is going to be how we run civilization a century from now. And really, we're just working through the motions to replace all the other indirect sources of sunlight with photovoltaics, which will dominate the energy supply in a couple of short decades.
Okay, on the last statement, what's your vision like? Where do you see you're going to be when it is fully implemented?
Yeah, I think that the energy system will be much larger. We'll have a lot more electricity in particular, and we'll have electrified the end uses of energy, what we call useful energy, by which I mean all industrial processes, except maybe some very high temperature industrial exercises, most transport, probably including most aviation and shipping and so forth, heating, cooling, all the things that we still currently do with internal combustion engines or steam boilers or some form of thermal combustion. Those will be replaced by direct electrification. And that will mean that the electrification of the economy will more than triple. In order to meet that with distributed renewables, which I think is the optimal economic structure or infrastructure, we will be managing variable renewable supply. The fact that the sun comes up at a certain known time and goes down at a certain known time, and that the wind is somewhat variable, that will need balancing with storage as the main solution, but also with demand response and a more flexible energy network and grid. It won't really look like the grid of old, but basically we'll have an abundant electricity supply. 300% more things will be electric power things today than they are today. And 300% or more, maybe 500% of what we currently consider our peak load will be served up daily through renewables. And then we'll be looking for things to do with that electricity outside of the known demand hours. So we'll be adding in appliances, uses for electricity, whether that be desalinating the ocean or processing minerals or making steel with electricity. All those things will become more possible as we have more and more power in the system from this abundant renewable resource. That's all technology that we know and have today. All of it is cost effective now or in the very near future because of the cost down curves we can consider to be fixed. And, you know, that future is probably a couple of decades from now at the outside, hopefully only a decade so that we can stave off the worst of the climate crisis we're in.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, once we start electrifying everything and this fundamental thinking that is changing the energy industry, that supply and demand has to met instantly, and it's only sort of electricity come from central grid. But if we tend the model saying electricity can be generated everywhere because sun is everywhere. That fundamentally changes. And if we are able to store cheap, then everything changes.
Right. And we are able to supply and store cheap already.
Yes.
Relatively, the levelized cost of storage has come down enormously. It's coming down so fast that I don't think our official stats and the agencies follow us. I don't think what there is available in the market in terms of battery cost for deployment is really measured or understood by the planners in grid management offices around the world. And so we're seeing these leapfrogging episodes where people are just not waiting for a grid to be built in the old-fashioned way and rather just using batteries as virtual power lines, just as many of them strung together can be a virtual power plant. I think we're seeing a lot of CapEx avoided, a lot of capital expenditure and costs avoided by the deployment of distributed renewables in a place like Pakistan, most notably in the last year or two, where you basically just subverted the paradigm and gone to distributed, and citizens have taken power into their own hands, literally and figuratively, at a much lower cost than Pakistan could ever have afforded to build out a resilient infrastructure in the old-fashioned way with grids and poles and wires and central station towers and HVDC and thermal combustion plants. It's just not going to happen in a country which is being hammered every sort of monsoon season with the weather. But citizens and communities and subsidiary entities within the country can build up a power supply that makes sense in that condition, and that's using solar and storage mostly.
You make a really very important point that we generally tend to agree. I remember going through a system plan for Afghanistan done by a very well-established German consultant. And I looked at there saying, what solar price you have got? If you use, this was almost more than a decade ago. If you use the price of today and if you use the forecast price, Afghanistan doesn't need to import electricity from the region because solar is so cheap. And he said, but
Right.
price. I said, you have to do forward. You're planning for next 20 years, but you're taking price of 1998. It does not help.
You've got to question whether these consultants are being belligerently stupid about, because we know that the cost has come down for technologies when they're mass produced, and there's a learning rate, the doubling of a television set's production reduced the cost of the television set. We know that to be true. We call it Moore's law in semiconductor silicon chips, and we think that's a well understood conventional wisdom, but for some reason we don't allow it to be applied to silicon cells or to lithium-based battery chemistries, even though they have all exhibited the same kind of learning curve, 20+% for every doubling of volume in both those technology categories. You know, if you project forward technology curves, which I continue to advise investors to just remember this fact, then yeah, next year alone will be significantly cheaper than this year. And 2 years out, 20% cheaper. And 5 years out, 50% cheaper. And therefore, to spend money on a large-scale gas or coal boiling system at some great expense with a 20-year payback, it's just not sound economics. There's a very limited investment case for those sorts of things. And yet these consultants and others are running around still perpetrating that mistake, I think. And to your point, right now, I am showing people a contract that I have in hand for an African startup that has a $50+ kilowatt hour battery contract delivered. Most of the models, most of the spreadsheets I see in investment cases are covering $150 to $250 battery costs. So if in the real market at the bottom of the pyramid, you're seeing 1/5 of that, and we know it's going to get cheaper again over time, then it's all over Red Rover in terms of the economic calculus. We won on cost a while ago. We're lower than the cost of production of the electricity from any boiler. It's the lowest cost electricity in the history of electricity. So now it's political will and execution that is needed.
Yes, you are describing in a world where electricity becomes free almost, zero marginal cost, right? So it's
Yeah.
part of the capex on it's like a use of roads. I don't pay a cent a kilometer for using the road. I pay annually road users fee, right? So in that world, electricity becomes free. That means transport is free, point A to B. And if the transport is free, and then, of course, with the agriculture technology, pumping and irrigation, hydroponics, food can be grown for free as well. So that changes. And if you say 500% electrification, everything got electricity, batteries, I don't know, $20 a kilowatt hour, maybe in 10 years' time, if it happened. Hey, we are in a very different world, huh?
Yeah. 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 I like the transport analogy. I think another one that I use as a mental model for people is Wi-Fi. We're all old enough or young enough, whatever the case may be, to remember when Wi-Fi was introduced into public spaces, and you'd go into a Starbucks and eke out a little contract for $5 a minute to upload or download this desperately important email or something or other. Now you walk around the streets and there's free Wi-Fi everywhere, and it's a function of those routers and that ICT technology just becoming so low cost that it could be deployed in most places. Where it's monopolized and controlled by vested interests, that may not be true, but effectively data streaming through Wi-Fi is now very close to free in a lot of places and very cheap in almost every place. And that electricity will be something like that in the future, I think. And then what that unleashes is TBD, I think, but it's quite a fascinating prospect, as you say, quite heartening, honestly. Again, to go to Pakistan as really a leader in this case in the world today, which is such a fun thing that Pakistan is often looked back as a laggard problem child, is actually doing what the world needs to do. We agreed at COP28 in Dubai that we needed to triple renewables by 2030. They did it in 20 months or something. But in that case, in the province of Balochistan, the farmers realized that they could replace diesel gensets that they have on these tube wells pumping water for irrigation. And probably this is true in Afghanistan as well. And it was reported that in some of these places, farmers were able to just put the panels out, literally lay them on the ground, wire them up to their pumps, get enough irrigation for their crops to have 3 harvests last year, not 2. A food scarce place that has been notorious for insecurity in relation to agriculture went from being hungry to being better fed, because electricity went from being expensive and diesel dependent and bringing in barrels of oil and all that stuff to there's a machine that just lies in the field and runs my pump 6 hours a day. And that allowed them to plant a 3rd crop. That's a remarkable emancipatory event in their lives. And that is a microcosm of what you're describing as the future we could all look forward to.
Yeah, then if you add to that, once it's electrified, once you have an access to as a DC small scale refrigeration unit that can run with a solar panel, then you don't need those central cold chain. It's mind-boggling what's going to happen, but it's happening
Right.
as you exactly said. And Pakistan case is really a good example because you're in Sydney, you might say average home consumption is 25 kilowatt hour a day. I have to plan for 30 kilowatt hour a day. I need a big solar panel. Go to these countries, they consume 1, 2, 3 kilowatt hour a day.
Yeah.
Almost nothing, because main consumption is lights. Initially, of course, they will love to have heating and cooling maybe eventually. But right now, what they're using is electricity for. It's so basic.
Yeah. And that's where I work mostly. So is in Asia, where energy demand growth is going to be the greatest. We can talk about data centers, and it really is a small gnat on the back of Asian populations growing both by number and in aspiration to have things we take for granted, like more than just lighting that is electrified. And they will need it. Like in Pakistan, again, one of the drivers of this whole solar rush has been air conditioning demand in Karachi when it's 40 degrees at night, and the only way to keep a kid cool is put a fan on. You work out how to run the fan. If it takes buying some solar panels down at the bazaar and sticking them on your roof, that's what you do. And that sort of survival instinct, I think, is going to drive demand for energy as the world goes through the wacky weather we've created. And that energy demand growth may be 2, 3, 5x what they currently consume. Still not where we are in the West, as you say, not 10x, I don't think, because they'll use more efficient appliances. They'll be smarter about it, like the blockchain example you used. But we will see enormous energy consumption growth in Asia. I think the official figures are in the sort of 85% of all known energy demand growth is in the countries of South and Southeast Asia. So, that's what we have to meet in order to stave off a crisis. The good news is that is most likely to be met by solar and storage because it's the lowest cost provider of the thing.
And if you stick to below 60-volt DC, you don't have the risk of electrocution. I was interviewing someone the other day saying, hey, we can do now up to maybe 200 watt on a USB-C connection. So maybe the whole DC mini grid within the house can come in and the world is a different place. Because I got really excited, again, talking to another guest who mentioned that you might have a very small solar installation in your house, but you can run an induction cooktop now because you have a battery that is a 3C discharge suddenly. You might have a 500 watt ability, but you can run a 1.5 kilowatt sort of induction cooktop and live for 15 minutes. The induction cooktops are super efficient, no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually think that induction cooking is probably what we've been looking for to replace the sort of cook stove crisis. And yeah, solar powered induction stoves with batteries on board is a technology bundle that you can see coming. All of these elements of the electric stack, the batteries, the electric motors, the photovoltaic supply, the inversion, the motor controllers in the case of things with moving parts, the compute, the IC, the integrated circuits and stuff that make it all work. All of that is commodity product now and coming down significant percentage points of cost every year. Releasing this set of electro stack technologies to the world is our goal, deployment and businesses to make that happen. Some of it, when bundled together, has a substantial upfront cost that requires financing, and some of the entrepreneurial genius required is the sort of bundling of those things with consumer finance. So there's business model innovation, there's stuff like that, but the technology is largely solved everywhere from induction cooking to logistics by drone. All of it relies on the same 5 or 6 component parts, and those are now interchangeable and flooding the market at low cost. That's an enormously different world to 2005. 20 years later, we're in a place. IEA didn't even foresee electric vehicles as a part of the mix. Literally, like the reports out at the turn of the century did not project electric vehicles as one of the pieces of the energy transition, and therefore oil consumption was projected to grow enormously till 2050 and so on. They still underestimate their growth and their application as batteries on wheels in grid management and this flexible grid solution set that we need. But clearly the largest battery deployment in the world is the transport we're putting out on the streets.
Yep.
And we're going to use that also for managing the electricity system, because to not do so is uneconomic. It's a redundant capacity that we have sitting on the driveway. Why not use it for V2G or demand response?
Yeah, and also, I think David Smith, one of my podcast guests, he mentioned saying, oh, by the way, have you noticed when you buy an electric car, there is a home battery inside for free. So you can connect with V2G, which is very true because battery prices inside a car is so much cheaper than home batteries that you buy today because it's a 2 different market, 2 different competitive forces in play.
100%, even better than that, to be honest. It's 3 home batteries in your car.
Yeah.
It's not just one. And you got mobility services as well for a lower cost per battery. That's crazy, the deal we're getting. And, it's not just cars, it's scooters, it's bikes, it's wheelchairs, it's whatever. They're all going to become assets. To your point about the local DC grid, the low voltage grid in your house, balcony solar plus an electric bike, and you run the home.
Yep, absolutely. Because another intriguing part here is the AI. I have a pet projects that I piloted as a Asian Development Bank staff in 3 countries. I used to call that electricity in a box. So you basically have a panel and a battery and a DC appliances bundle up. My target was $1,000, but now we can do it $500. And basically start with the DC appliances super tight in terms of energy efficiency, and then you build it up so that you have the lowest size solar panel. Now, my numbers were out by 4 years or 5 years that we have not. Last week, I sat down over a coffee and I said, okay, let me see if I want to do it again. What TV should I buy? What fridge should I get? It's extraordinary. It can just plug and play. What do you need? Oh, you need a set of light bulb. What kind is? Okay, you might consider this. And I was thinking that possibly a 3 months or a 6 months of consulting services of how does an expert to comb through the world what is going on, and you can do in minutes. And I'm sure the Pakistans of the world now, because the technology is there, just putting a problem out saying, AI, help me solve it. And what should I buy? No?
I've got an old Honda motorbike. It needs repair, but are there any kits available online where I can knock the gas tank out and put some batteries in and replace the internal combustion engine with an electric motor? Yes, says ChatGPT. Here are 6 choices. Climb them to your home in Indonesia and replace it. And Bob's your uncle, your bike is better and it's a battery for your house. I think the sky is the limit. And certainly, I guess I can help with that and the design of the community scale and the town and city scale and provincial and national scale stuff as well.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be playing with these things. Show me a YouTube video that can take me through. And then you say, here are half a dozen of those. Okay, which one? And what minute should I play if it's a 1-hour video? No? Oh my God.
I was in Pakistan earlier this year, and part of my reason for going was to just work out who's doing all this. The talk of 20 gigawatts installed in 18 months from a base of less than a gigawatt of distributed installs. How did they get it done just as a matter of labor? And the answer is electricians have self-taught. There are some offerings and training and some online, some offline, but largely it's kind of like YouTubers and TikTokers shooting videos explaining you stick this into this. And I'm sure there are some mistakes made, but it's pretty simple technology and it's available and people can work it out and learn from one another and spread virally the solutions, which is the power of lots of littles. Once there's a demand source for it, I think the bigger end of town has underestimated. I don't know whether you've seen the latest BNEF figures, but for the first half of this year, small solar is booming, outnumbering large-scale solar installations. It has actually been for a couple of halves, a couple of quarters before in 2024 as well. China is really driving this again, much to everyone's surprise. China was the story of giga-scale, utility-scale stuff in the West to ship electrons through 3,000 kilometer HVDC to the east on the seaboard. And now they're just stuffing their cities full of interstitial solar deployments with batteries to boot, and did 100 and some gigawatts in the first half of this year. It's unbelievable volumes.
Yep, they don't do anything small.
Yeah. Thankfully, because they're bending the curve on their own carbon emissions and making it possible for everyone else to do it, both leading the way and manufacturing the stuff at scale and making it cheap enough that we can all buy it.
Yeah, and I think the bit that you all mentioned about people learning from TikTok and YouTube videos, while they might make some mistakes, but I think that also changing the way we learn and teach. universities and others. I don't know. Because in the Philippines, I'm here right now this month. I went to a shop the other day, was wandering around, and I used to tinker with things as a child. So I looked at this guy fixing an Apple Watch. And really, I mean, with a big magnifying here and there. And I said, how did you learn? He said, every time a model comes in, we put this YouTube channel, someone has have done it in the first, and we play with this, we practice, and then we are all experts.
Wow.
Do you know how it works? No, but we know you need to have a bit of separate this static charge here, there. This should not touch this. Do you know why? No. But you know how to do it? Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. No, to your point about learning, this stuff's survival too, right? Faced with the prospect of volatile fuel supplies, they know they need electricity to do all the things of the modern economy. They could buy gas from Uncle Sam at the point of a gun, or they could get some solar and storage and stitch it together and work out how it works and make it go. Which path do you think they'll be pursuing at scale?
Yes, absolutely. Because the traditional planners and thinkers, everybody needs capacity building and the training program that's already very well established. People don't. I tested myself with a challenge the other day. I have a home battery, sorry, not a home battery. I had a 1 kilowatt hour battery lying around here. And this lady came in saying, my home doesn't have a power. If you give it to me, I can fix the rest. I said, how? And I said, okay, give it a challenge. If you can install it for free, send me a video. I'll get you the cables. It's free. So I'm waiting the weekend, and later on I got a video. He had 3 kids sorting out YouTube videos. Mom, connect this with that. Yes, they're running fan and light with electricity. And I said, okay, I lost my bet. You can have the $400 battery that you were sitting there not doing much. It's amazing. Why you need a training program? People. Now, Danny, the question is now we are all doing all of those things. What we'll do in terms of stranded asset of our favorite utilities and government's investment and redundant investments and all of those regulatory framework, what will happen?
I think a lot of people lose a lot of money. It's not my problem. I'm not dumb enough to have invested in that stuff in the last decade because I saw the writing on the wall. But if you did, it's on you. This wasn't not apparent in 2015. This was an inkling. It was certainly within scope. So responsible investors need to do a risk reward scenario and work out what the likelihood is. I'm not saying everyone should take a bath. I don't know. You underwrite this some way for a soft landing, but it is, we are over, like, I don't know what it is. It's like some weird impulse we have to protect the capitalists when their entire game is making an informed investment. And if they were wrong, then theoretically the market does what it will do.
They should be afraid right now sitting on boardroom because the government is not going to be able to underwrite once people figure out the full details of how things have been working in the past, no?
Absolutely. They are afraid. This is why there's been massive flight from fossils. Twice as much money is being spent annually in the clean energy side of the register already. If you're still investing in fossil fuel infrastructure right now, then you deserve to take a bath. That's beyond the pale, honestly, if you're underwriting that stuff. And if you are just having it on, if you're a banker or an insurer doing it, you're just eking out rent at the expense of taxpayers, probably, which is not a nice thing to do. Yeah, I think history's moved on. It's 2025. We know what the shape of the system's going to be in 2040. If you think your 20-year lived asset is viable, then take a bet, but don't go crying to the public purse to be repaid when it goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's 2025. You mentioned 2015 earlier. I was in a meeting of Asian Development Bank. There's a forum called CAREC, Central Asian Regional Economic Cooperation. So there is all the ministers of all the former Soviet countries. Of course, they're floating in gas. I wanted to present my management, say, oh, you really want? I said, no, I want to push them. So I started with that famous quotation from Saudi oil minister, like a stone age came to an end, not because they ran out of stone. I used that. And second photo I came out from Telstra cables in Australia. There was AFR piece once saying, yeah, these copper cables, they can dig it out and sell. They make more money than was the Tesla share prices, somebody said. So I used those and I said, no, this is going to be, just sink it in. No one will want your gas 10 years from today. You don't want to hear me, but no one would, because it's the second fossil fuel. The penny finally dropped. Then one of the senior minister, I forgot which, Uzbekistan maybe, okay, came out and said, okay, we are interested. Tell us more. Okay, we'll look at it solar. We don't like it, but yes. But I think that penny drop is very important. And our politicians needs to be very aware. They cannot underwrite these bad decisions of today, tomorrow.
You must have been an interesting character in that meeting. That's good on you for 2015 being able to do that. But as I say, we knew then at least enough to be raising the alarm for folk like that. But I can't remember the saying, but there's some old quip about it's very hard to convince a man to do something that is against his vested interest. And that's the dynamic for these gas-based states. And if you look at the behaviors of the Australians even, who are a large exporter of gas and coal, the Americans who have become the largest exporter of gas and coal at exactly this moment. The irony is rich, plus Russia and some of its Soviet, pretty old satellite nations, and the Middle East. They're all fighting against this tide, but it's not really possible in the longer term, because that energy demand growth we described was of nations that do not swim in gas. Most of the emerging markets and developing economies of the global south, 70% of them or so, are without those abundant resources of fossil fuels. So they're net importers. So they're prone to whatever the whims of the market are, the insecurity of geopolitics and people blowing up pipelines and whatever else, and the price fluctuation, when they can get a steady and fixed and declining cost structure to plan their future on, to meet that energy demand growth that we talked about. If it's anywhere like 85% is going to be in Asia, guess what? Most of those places don't have gas. They would be buying it from Qatar or Australia or America, wherever. That's not going to go. So you're exactly right. And an analyst, anyone watching this that is still needing to sharpen their pencil, should definitely worry about $1 billion plus investment in an LNG terminal when $100 million worth of PV and batteries will displace 20 years of power from a gas infrastructure like that. It's fractional requirements to do what the guys need to do to get up to the sort of economies of scale they need to make an investment. The days of $1 billion things, I think, are gone. Must be part of the problem for places like ADB, where the sort of mental model is just so stuck in the past. I always enjoy one of the ratios that the Bloomberg guys study every year in the World Energy Outlook, tracks the decentralization of energy assets. In the turn of the century, 2000, the average power plant was like a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts. By 2050, it'll be 50 megawatts, the average. There'll still be a couple gigawatt things going into the system. Bulk of them will be megawatt things.
That's interesting. I did not know that data existed. That would be actually fun to see how it become fragmented. Yes, amazing.
Like it's going out. And for bankers who don't get out of bed for less than $100 million, I'm not really interested in a 50 megawatt thing that was $50 million last year and is declining.
Yeah, that is a problem, because there is a project in Kyrgyz Republic, I think Kambarata or something, 2000 megawatt. I think World Bank financing, Asian Development Bank looking, government is very interested. But I used to cover Kyrgyz Republic. And once I drove through and I just looked at the landscape, this will be all flooded. Is it going to happen? Multi-billion dollars. I took a conclusion. No, because what people don't appreciate, this 2000 megawatt or any gigawatt scale power plant, you don't get a single kilowatt hour until you build the whole damn thing. You need tons of money to go there, right? Just like a Rogun, Russia almost built in Tajikistan, but Russian Empire came to and Rogun never saw the light. Now Rogun being built. Whereas rather than building this 2000 megawatt, if they started, we say, okay, let's do 50 megawatts. Now 20, 20, 20, 20, and progressively you can fill up the whole valley, and you can do maybe even agrovoltaics without taking the livelihood of people and encourage them, saying grow because there is sun and shade. That's a much better, and you get the first kilowatt maybe in the first day.
You can do, hundreds of megawatts in a week. Like, honestly, that is now doable with the deployment systems and tools we have for deploying solar in particular. Again, to go back to Pakistan in their leadership, there have been several large renewable projects that was being pre-developed in the COVID era, both wind and solar outside of Karachi for K Electric and elsewhere. Hundreds of megawatts. None of them has got to the final investment decision because, all the question marks about Pakistan and whatever problems the financiers have. So I think total there was about 2 gigawatts of proposals at fairly developed stages for those sorts of larger couple hundred megawatt plus systems. Meanwhile, the citizens of Pakistan went up to the border of China and bought truckloads of panels and deployed 20 gigawatts. It's just, which bit of this picture are we not seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then once you figure out cent per kilowatt hour, saying how much you get to the power company and how much it costs you to produce. And now, thanks to ChatGPT, anyone can do those analyses. And he said, hey, we have been doing this. No,
in Germany, there's over 1 million balcony solar units. They're seeing like 25% demand destruction on the grid in some provinces of Germany. And it's because Germans are just like, oh, wow, that's effective rate for my cooking cost, half what I was paying the grid for. Why not?
Yeah, this is something in Australia not allowed yet. I have a house in Melbourne. I wanted to replace the fence with solar power just to get a bit attention and send a message to the neighbors. But then no installer will touch it because Australian law doesn't allow you to do that.
Oh, interesting.
I wanted to do so. Fence will look amazing.
This too shall pass. We should have the right to choose what we want as our generating asset. We should have the right to connect it into the grid to trade it with others, and we should have the right to be compensated for it. That's like basics. And then if that were the case, we'd run away with it. The German market says that wood for fencing is more expensive than PV. So put a panel up and plug it into a battery and cook your dinner on it or charge your car with it. Like, even if you're not allowed officially to plug it into the grid in Australia, you can still have a backup and do your car charging.
Yeah, I think unless I install it myself, I don't think any installer will take, because of course they will lose their license.
And again, how long is the system going to hold against the tide that has turned?
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned at the beginning a lot of different technologies. So one part I'm very interested in, and I see still very slow progress. One is electric boat. I don't see any reason. It's a battery on the water, and it could be the largest mobile floating solar running around, still generating electricity, especially in developing Asia. And then, of course, electric planes, which is happening slowly, but definitely should move faster than what we can think of, no?
Yeah, and maybe those two things commingle, actually, and I can explain what I've seen, and I'm speculating somewhat, but yeah, I'm with you. I think maritime electrification is a big next thing that we're underestimating, particularly not shipping, not the sort of large-scale vessels that people worry about, but the millions of people in the Philippines. How many tens of millions of people predominantly travel by boat with an outboard motor? Like, it must be in the millions. I think in Indonesia, it's 5 million humans will never travel by road. They travel by boat. So all those folk are dependent on outboard motors, which pretty clunky old motors that haven't really been innovated for decades. There's half a dozen brands that dominate even Asia's market. They're pretty shit. They get replaced every 5 to 7 years to standard practice, which is why there's always outboard mechanics in every village and all the rest of it. Their parts go, too many moving parts, too many explosions inside the chamber and gaskets to go. Like they give out, so they need replacing. So there's a huge retrofit market to just replace that internal combustion engine with an electric motor. And there are companies doing this. There's one here in Australia in Kiama, New South Wales, called E-Class Motors that I've seen with a pilot program in the Solomon Islands, actually. I've been on that boat on the outboard and it's perfectly fine. I've seen folk doing this with the long-tail fishing boats in Bali, the sort that has the long pole out over the motor, over the gunnel, and they're just replaced. They historically have had these big 2-stroke putt-putt motors on the end of the pole up here. And you can get an off-the-shelf electric motor at a home store and replace that. There's a little bit of configuration around the propeller shaft, the same basic drivetrain, and then the battery pack is put in a Pelican case and waterproofed and perfectly fine. So again, technology, just as we found with cars, you can do that. And people are doing it. There are companies like Naut, N-A-U-T, which makes a lovely electric launch, and Candela and some others in the sort of high-end markets. The Norwegians actually is mandating this, and every middle-class Norwegian has a cruiser-class sort of vessel to take out in the summer. And they're all going electric. Canal boats of Amsterdam have gone electric. But that's not trickling down yet. So it was the roadster moment where we were with cars in 2005. Wealthy folk are buying a fun little go-kart with electric motor from Tesla. But then that learning is going to allow us to bring it to the masses at low cost. Most likely in Asia, just as electric vehicles were driven by China's adoption. I think electric boats will be too. But the other part of this puzzle is that energy demand for boats is actually the biggest energy end use in these countries. We talked at the start of this conversation about electrification of everything. In Fiji, or probably the Philippines, I've not done the analysis, but because the electricity demand on land, the terrestrial, home-based or business-based electricity is, as you said, 2 or 3 kilowatt per person. Their transport, however, using boats, which are very inefficient, pushing boats through water, is a high energy load. And if we can electrify that, we both preserve 40% of their share of wallet, like what they're spending as communities on transport is enormous, all in foreign exchange losses, because let's face it, Fiji doesn't have any oil and produce or refine its own. It's just buying it at great expense into these islands to pour into these very inefficient 2-stroke engines to putt around. So we can replace that cost, and by filling up the largest energy use segment, which is this transport sector, we would create sort of an oversupply of the batteries and the electric motors and the know-how needed to electrify everything else. I think it's actually a better way to go for a lot of these island communities is start with the boats. You bring in solar power canopies for docks, and you get some standard productized charging units and battery cabinets, kind of like the 2-stroke battery stations that Gogoro made standard for 2 wheels, and the rickshaw people in India have now for 3 wheels. And you would just implement that. There'd be enough batteries in the economy that you'd be swapping them out for the vessels and also using them to boil the water at home for the dinner and drive the 2-wheeler over the island to the other side. Like, effectively, you solve for the whole energy demand need by focusing on the very expensive end of it for these communities, which is in their maritime sector.
Yep, we actually putting together a startup exactly along the lines for the Philippines. I have been helping a company, Tiger Electric in Bangladesh. They have a battery as a service company. So exactly as you said, but much cheaper option for electric three-wheeler. We are bringing that to the Philippines and putting into, exactly as you said, also on the bank, large solar power based charge. So people just take a battery, plunk it in, off you go. And then you might take one and put into home, run your induction cooktop or whatever you want to do. Just a standard module of batteries. And then you don't have to worry about pilferage, leaking of oil, and they get this sort of old, sort of reusing oil from big vessels, which has a actually very high carbon footprint also.
Tiger Electric are that great pair of women from Harvard, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Chinese nationals ended up in Makara during COVID and are doing the project in Cox's Bazar.
Yes. Oh, Nicole Mao and her team. Yeah. She was here last week in Manila to present at ADB, and we have been working together to scale that up in Bangladesh. Amazing story. I met her through also podcast.
They're fantastic. I love that business. Yeah. And that's amazing you bring it to the Philippines. So look, I think you're on the right path with the maritime piece. When you asked about aviation and maritime, and this is maybe a little bit more speculative, but I think a lot of short-haul aviation can be electrified already. Cessna is a similar machine. They have a 6-year life of engine currently because ICs just are so shitty. And so when they do that renovation, they can replace them with electric motors. And interestingly, they get as much torque out of a smaller compact electric motor these days. So you can put 2 electric motors in where one ICE engine fits. So you get redundancy, like a single engine plane suddenly becomes a dual motor plane, which is a nice benefit to electrification safety. And then you use the gas tank area in the plane as the battery storage area, lightweighted lithium-based batteries. All that's possible for sort of 200 and 300 kilometer range flights, which are actually many. There's a lot of runs that only use that sort of distance. But another model that I've seen, I think Region Air, is a startup doing basically boats that just skim across the surface, that they actually take off and they fly effectively for intercoastal travel. So they don't need to get to significant altitude to just benefit from being in the air and reduce friction from the water. And the electric propulsion system on their wings is basically this electrostatic tech coming out of drones. 20 of those, they work solar powered. I think it might be a hybridization of small plane and boat technology using this electrostatic.
Wow, that's actually very good thinking. Yes, you really don't have to go that high up.
Yeah, no, they've got an 8-seater in the air, not in the air, and 12 feet above the water in production, apparently, testing it out. And I think that might come to, again, a wealthy market near you before it makes it to everywhere.
Thank you so much. I learned so many things, Danny. What else you do? Keep so active. You must be in so many things, flying around a lot.
Too much, but enjoying working with entrepreneurs like you and just trying to lift them up. And for your audience, one thing I'm involved with that I think is fun is called futurekeepers.world, and a series of YouTube channels in Tagalog and Bahasa Indonesian and Mandarin and Urdu and other languages, where we're just trying to lift up these stories and news flow of entrepreneurs in Asia driving the energy transition. So this transformation needs a megaphone, and people consume information and media these days differently. And so we're focused on digital, not so much podcasting, this sort of long form style, but short form and the 40-second video versions of things so that young people will see it. So if you want to check out futurekeepers.world on the web or futurekeepers at YouTube, be grateful. Please give us a follow and share it. And on LinkedIn, you can find us. That'd be great. But very grateful for the opportunity to have a conversation, and thank you for your work.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to get into this space of entrepreneurship. I'm a former banker. I used to work for power companies in Australia, then ADB for 20 plus years. So yeah, I've done a lot of big projects, as you said. We used to do big project, but when you look at the smaller end, saying, "Wow, that's where all the exciting things are happening," because a lot of young people involved, very little baggage they carry. So, can I somehow contribute into that space?
Yeah. Great. Do you know New Energy Nexus in the Philippines?
No, I don't know them. New Energy Nexus. Okay, I can look them up.
So that's an entrepreneur support organization that I used to work with, and a woman called Brenda Bellario runs that. And also here in Australia, if you come back to Melbourne, Energy Lab in Australia, I'm a
Yeah.
director of, and Megan Fish is in Melbourne.
Yeah, Energy Lab, I know. Every time I'm in Sydney, I look them up.
Yeah, I think your listeners should definitely look up Energy Lab, New Energy Nexus for more general. They're present in Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines.
Okay. Yep.
Program out in Pakistan as well. And in Japan, I believe, with Jetro. So lots of stuff in Asia.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Danny. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice day.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. If you enjoyed this, don't forget the full video is on YouTube. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.